Okay, so now we're going to open up our project in Visual Studio Code, and I'm inside the datingapp.api in my command prompt or terminal window. And just to open up Visual Studio Code, what we can do is type in code, followed by a period, press return, and this will open up Visual Studio Code. Now, if you're on a Mac, this might not happen for you because it needs to be added to the path. So what you can do if you're on a Mac is just open up Visual Studio Code the normal way. And then if we take a look here, we can see on the panel in the middle, we've got an option to show all commands and go to file and find in files. But if we look at the show all commands, which is Shift Command and P, in my case anyway, it's probably slightly different on a Mac or a Windows computer. And we've got an option, if we type in shell, there's an option for shell command install code command in path. If you select this, just press return, then this will allow you to use the shortcut method I just demonstrated to open up Visual Studio Code. Now we can see our project on the left hand side in Solution Explorer, and we'll take a look at these shortly, but first of all, there's a couple of C# related extensions that we'll want to install into our VS Code. So on the extensions tab here, we can search inside the marketplace for C# related extensions. Now there's 3 that we're going to install at this point just to get us started, and the first one is C# for Visual Studio Code powered by OmniSharp. This turns VS Code from pretty much a colourful version of Notepad into something more akin to a IDE. This gives us syntax highlighting, IntelliSense, go to definition, find all references, and it also includes debugging support for .NET Core, so we definitely need this. So let's go ahead and click the install button to get this in there. Another one that we want is C# extensions, just a few down in here, and we'll install this as well because this gives us the ability to create C# classes within Solution Explorer. So let's just install this one as well. And another one that we want is Nougat Package Manager for VS Code as well. And this allows us to use VS Code to install certain types of package that we'll use in our .NET application, which are known as Nougat packages. For our Angular application, we'll be using NPM packages, but for .NET, we use Nougat packages. So I'll also install this as well. And once you've got those 3, just click on Reload, and they'll be installed and available for use. So let's now take a look at the project itself. We'll get a prompt on the right hand side saying there's some assets to build and debug are missing from our project. Do we want to add them? So we'll just click yes to that. And this will create a folder inside here for VS Code which contains a launch.json and a tasks.json file. We'll come back to those later. But for now we want to take a look at a couple of files that are involved in the startup of our application. And there's 2 of them. There's program.cs and startup.cs. Let's first take a look at program.cs. And if you've ever built a console application or any C# application before, you'll recognize this. But what the program class is an entry point into our application. And it typically has one method, which is the main method, and this is the entry point. When we run our application, this is the method that's invoked, and this calls another method called create web host builder, which we can see just below. Now, this create web host builder, I'm not going to go too deep into what this is right now, but what we will do is just take a quick peek at what's inside here, and if we right click on this file, we can click go to definition. And this will open up the stub of the methods that we're calling inside our main method. And inside here, it goes through and tells us what this particular method is going to do. So the main thing it's going to do is it's going to use Kestrel as the web server and configure it using the application's configuration providers. And this is important because we're building a web API and we need a web server to be able to host it. Now, Kestrel is a very lightweight web server. It's not as powerful as IIS or Apache, but it will certainly allow us to start our .NET application, and we'll be able to send HTTP requests to this server and get a response back from our application. And we can do all of this in development. It's also got some other settings and configuration. We've got something related to configuration with this app settings.json. And it's also got some logging information as well. And we'll see as we develop our application that we can get information out into our terminal window when we're doing various actions and activities. So I'll just go back to the program class because this also uses a startup class. And our startup class contains the startup methods for the application. So let's go and take a very brief look at this one. This one we're going to come back to time and time again through building this application. And there's a couple of methods in here. One of them is the configure services method. Now we're going to heavily use dependency injection, and certain libraries and classes we're going to want to make available to other classes inside our application, and we can inject them into other classes in our application. And we can do all of this by using this configure services method. Now there's one already in here, services.addMVC, and if we want to use the .NET framework for a web API, then we definitely need this service in here. Now it's got a set compatibility version to version 2.1, and we're using version 2.1 of ASP.NET Core. This is just by default. This is something new they've added in version 2.1, so we can leave this as it is. And if we scroll a bit further down, we get to the configure method, and this method configures the HTTP request pipeline. So there's a couple of things in here. First of all, there's an if statement to check to see if the environment is the development environment. And if it is, then it uses something referred to as a developer exception page. We won't discuss this now. We'll talk about this later on when we look at error handling. And if we're not in development mode, then this else statement is used. And this app use HSTS. This is also new for ASP.NET Core 2.1. And this is a security enhancement that is specified by a web application through the use of a special response header. And once a browser receives this header, that browser will prevent any communications from being sent over HTTP to the specified domain, and instead sends all communications over HTTPS. And this is used in conjunction with the next method down here, the app.use HTTPS redirection. Now, both of these are new for ASP.NET Core 2.1, and our main focus is building an application, and we're not going to worry about security before we've even started. So the first thing that we'll do is just comment these two methods out. I know this sounds terrible, but we will come back to this later on. And to comment something out, you just press the Command and / key in VS Code, and when your cursor is on that particular line, it will either comment or uncomment that line. And the final one is a call to use MVC, which is the framework we're using for this application. It gives us the ability to route to our different actions that we're going to build in our application. So next we're going to take a look at what our application gives us out of the box. And spoiler alert, this isn't very much, but at least it'll give us an opportunity to see our application working and everything that we've installed is correctly installed.